When you're standing in front of a lab bench, the balance you choose can feel like a silent partner in every experiment. If you've ever bought a scale that promised micrometer precision but then spent half the day fiddling with error messages, you know the hesitation that comes before clicking Add to Cart. That's why I want to spend a few minutes walking through the Ohaus AX324 Adventurer AX Analytical balance, not just the headline numbers, but the day-to-day reality of using it in a working environment. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. First, let's acknowledge the biggest question most of us ask: do I really need a balance that can weigh down to 0.0001 grams, and will it actually behave reliably when the lab is busy, the temperature shifts, or the bench vibrates? The Adventurer AX is positioned as a mid-range analytical balance with a 320-gram capacity, which slots it between the really tiny microbalances and the larger industrial scales. For a typical chemistry or biology lab that handles reagents, standard solutions, and occasional sample preparation, that capacity is usually more than enough. If you're running a quality control lab that needs to check bulk powders in the kilogram range, you'll quickly run into the capacity ceiling and better look elsewhere. One of the first things I noticed, after digging through a few product videos and the manual, is the 9 application modes. They're not just a marketing checklist, they translate into concrete workflows. For example, the dynamic weighing mode lets you add and subtract material on the fly without resetting the balance each time. In a routine titration where you're adding solid reagent in small increments, this mode can shave off a few minutes per run and reduce the chance of resetting errors. The display hold function is equally handy when you need to step away and still see the last reading. Think of a situation where you're documenting weight while simultaneously recording temperature elsewhere in the lab. The AutoCal feature is another point that separates the Adventurer AX from a lot of older balances you might have seen on a second-hand market. AutoCal performs an internal calibration automatically at set intervals, which means you don't have to schedule a manual calibration every week. In practice, this lowers the maintenance overhead and reduces the odds of drift during a critical assay. I've seen labs where the technician forgets the weekly calibration, leading to a cascade of minor errors that only become apparent when results don't line up. With AutoCal, the balance essentially reminds you by doing the work itself. Connectivity is another practical consideration. The AX324 comes with USB and optional Ethernet ports, allowing you to export data directly to a lab computer or LIMS system. In a busy teaching lab, this can mean students simply press export and have a CSV file ready for their lab report, avoiding manual transcription errors. For a research group, it enables real-time data logging when you're running a kinetic experiment that requires weighing at set time intervals. The trade-off, however, is that you'll need to spend a little time setting up the communication protocol and ensuring the software version on the PC matches the firmware version on the balance. It's not a showstopper, but it does require a small upfront investment in configuration. Now let's get into the practical strengths that genuinely matter after you unpack the box. The display is a clear, white LCD that remains legible even under bright lab lights, which is a subtle but real benefit when you're trying to read a weight while the room lights are on full blast for safety reasons. The controls are tactile and responsive. You can switch between modes with a single press, and the Totaliza mode, which accumulates successive weighings, works reliably for compositing multiple components into a final mixture. In a formulation lab where you're adding small quantities of several additives, this mode eliminates the need for a separate calculator. On the downside, the balance's sensitivity to vibrations is something to keep in mind. While the AX324 includes a built-in vibration damping system, it still performs best on a sturdy, isolated bench. If your lab space has heavy foot traffic or nearby equipment that vibrates, like centrifuges or HVAC units, you might notice occasional fluctuation warnings. For a typical bench setup with a modest anti-vibration mat, the issue is manageable, but it's not the kind of balance you'd want on a high-vibration table. Another practical weakness is the learning curve around the 9 application modes. The manual provides a concise description of each, but new users often spend the first day or two toggling between them without fully understanding the nuances. In my experience, the most common mistake is using dynamic weighing when a static measurement would have been more appropriate, leading to small systematic errors that accumulate over a batch. The balance does not automatically warn you if you're in the wrong mode for a given task, so you'll need to train your team or create a quick reference sheet that hangs near the instrument. Who should buy the Ohaus AX324? If you're a professor or lab manager who needs a reliable analytical balance for routine